In Ontario, we've seen a lot of wetland loss, especially in southern Ontario, south of the Shield. Over 70% of the wetlands have been lost, and in many areas that percentage increases to over 85%. The reason for decline is fairly straightforward. Since settlement, we have drained and paved over and filled in wetlands in order to convert the land for other uses, for example, agriculture or urban development, etc. Wetlands are so fundamental to so many species in terms of their life cycles. Whether it's migrating waterfowl, or it's fish nurseries, or it's insects that are hatching around wetlands, all of these things require those habitats. And if they're not around, neither will those forms of life be around. But there are many other reasons why we need to be concerned about wetland loss, and one of these is climate change.
I think that a lot of people, they're out of sight, out of mind, right? If you live in a city, you don't really think of wetlands too much. But if you think of all the rivers that flow down through Toronto, for example, and the Don and the Humber, the upper reaches of those areas have wetlands at their source. And if you don't have those wetlands in place, like if you turn all that area, for example, into a subdivision or industrial park or something, then all of the ability of those upper headwaters to absorb snowmelt or rainfall, and especially the kind of rain events that we have now because of climate change, that's all diminished. So you can end up having flash floods every time it rains. You can end up in the spring with the banks of the rivers at the lower reaches overflowing into the city. It also diminishes the water quality, because you can imagine if the water runs off very quickly, and especially if it's running off parking lots or cement areas, that it's going to be much lower quality than if it was actually filtered by a wetland. So when you have a situation where you've already lost so many, you really have to wonder, why are we not stopping the loss now and beginning to reverse that process? And by comparison, for example, in the United States, just south of the border, they've had a policy of stopping wetland loss since 1989. So, what was that? We're about 30 years behind at the objective setting level. So we really need to be more ambitious in Ontario than we have been. And we're really hoping that we can change that trajectory.
The Ontario Wetland Conservation Strategy. This is a strategy that came out last summer, 2017. And it's a strategy, it's not policy. And that means it's not something that people have to do. Rather, it's a plan for action. And that strategy sets out things that government and others must do, but it doesn't actually hold them to it. So it's a very strong strategy in some respects, and in other respects it's a little bit on the weak side. For example, the strategy sets out two main targets. One of the targets is to halt the loss of wetlands by 2025. And the other target is to achieve a net gain in wetland area and extent by 2030. So sure, we want to see wetland loss halted, and we want to see a gain in wetland area and extent, but it seems to me that those timelines are a bit loose. I mean, it basically condones another 7 years of wetland loss before we actually can turn the tide, and that's too much. We've already lost too much, and we have to come to grips with that and figure out how to stop it.
My name is Sue Stubley. About 30 years ago, my mother and her late husband were living in Cambridge, and my mother, Bernice Beale, is a painter, an artist, and she does a lot of landscape painting. And so she would go throughout the countryside looking for beautiful places to do paintings. And they found this property, and they found out that it was for sale, and decided to build a home here, not realizing that they would then spend the next 30 years trying to protect it. We own approximately 83 acres. Most of Barrie's Lake is on our property. It is a provincially significant wetland, an environmentally sensitive policy area, and it is also within what the region of Waterloo calls the environmentally sensitive landscape. After my mother and her late husband purchased this property, the threats to the property began immediately. Of course, there have always been threats from agricultural runoff, but there have been a variety of projects that they have had to oppose. One of them was to put a highway bypass through Barrie's Lake, and they had to contend with false claims that Barrie's Lake was two bodies of water, and therefore it was okay to put a major highway bypass through it. Other problems we have had, of course, the turtle problem. Every year, turtles cross Roseville Road between the wetlands, and hundreds have been killed or horrifically injured. So the region of Waterloo in 2013, council decided to reduce the speed limit and also install turtle crossing signs. So we felt that was a great victory. Our celebration was short-lived because immediately after that we went to a meeting in Cambridge, a public information meeting for Cambridge West, and we just went to have a look to see what they were saying. And we walked in the door and there was a series of display boards, and on the second or third board that we saw, Barrie's Lake, outside of the jurisdiction of the City of Cambridge, was labeled as a stormwater option for Cambridge West development. We opposed that immediately, and we were told by staff that due to its provincial significance, it was unlikely that Barrie's Lake would be chosen for stormwater runoff from the subdivision. That, however, turned out not to be true. To my understanding, there will be 155 condos at the end of Barrie's Lake, and on the other side of the road, I'm not sure what it's up to now, probably over 1,700 units. They're going to put a roundabout which will send continuous traffic onto Roseville Road through the posted Turtle Wildlife Crossing area. And that will be several thousand cars that will be added to already quite heavy traffic. So Barrie's Lake is actually quite surrounded.
Hi, I'm Mayor Sue Foxton. I sit as mayor of North Dumfries Township. I also am a regional councillor, and I'm also a board member of Grand River Conservation Authority. There's not a hard line between municipalities, and because of that, flow of traffic and people cross many boundaries. Today, you coming here, you don't even realize how many communities and boundary roads you actually crossed. So whatever happens at Cambridge West will definitely impact North Dumfries. It's on our border. So they can say traffic is going to flow into Cambridge in a certain direction to connect to the 401, but odds are people are going to take the shortest route, and that shortest route is through North Dumfries to the 401. So it will impact us with the density of and the increase in traffic. Where's that traffic going to go? It's going to go on to the roadway by Barrie's Lake, which is an interesting and difficult situation because of the turtles that crossed Barrie's Lake to nest on the other side of the road. So Sue Subley owns Barrie's Lake, and it's very rare to find a single owner of a lake. Well, she owns 99.9%, and that's part of the problem. 1% is owned by the development of Cambridge West. There's all kinds of regulations within our official plan and the regional official plan and the City of Cambridge's official plan. For instance, in North Dumfries, did you know you can't build anywhere but in the town of Ayr? There's no other allowing of building or development anywhere else. Cambridge has the same sort of regulations. They are abutting up right next to the countryside line. That's what it's called, the countryside line, and that's where no building's allowed. So because of that, they have to create greater density in a smaller area. It's called the Places to Grow legislation put down by the province. I have a lot of concerns with it. Right now the density is 60 per hectare. That means nothing really to you until you put it on a different perspective of what it means is that a development there has to be smaller lots. There has to be more houses. Now the province in the last year has passed a new legislation saying 80 per hectare. What that means in a small condensed community is that there'll be no more single family homes. There will only be townhouses and apartment buildings. So that density is to protect our countryside line. And so that's good, but the negative is people on top of people and the conflicts we have when you put too many people in one small area. you're going to see a lot more, and traffic concerns and safety concerns, and people are becoming more vocal, which is a great thing. Complacency is like the death of a society. So it's good. We're supposed to be vocal and active, and we're supposed to stand up and make a change.
For many years, people complained because of the high number of turtles that were killed or horrifically injured on Roseville Road. So the regional staff asked that there be a study on Roseville Road, and we participated in it last year, and my neighbor Julie Reed, along with a company called Natural Resource Solutions, and we documented turtles crossing the road and any other wildlife crossing the road. We photographed the top and bottom of each turtle, measured them, and filled out forms for the date, time, weather, direction that they were going. And all of this information was mapped, and it was used by Region of Waterloo staff to come up with a plan for exclusionary fencing and also a few eco passages that will go under the road that will hopefully save a lot of turtles. And we are hoping that this will be approved. However, it will not be voted upon until after the next regional election. And so there may be an entirely different regional council that will vote on it. There are at least 50 killed every year. The bigger problem is that we're seeing fewer turtles every year. I would have to say mostly people keep going. Some that could be that they aren't aware that they have hit a turtle if it's a very small turtle. But we have seen snapping turtles this big that have been run over 4 times. And the cars just unfortunately keep going. I think that people don't know what to do. And that's part of the problem that we need some public education on.
If you see a turtle on the road and it's not laying eggs by the side of the road like many of them are right now, the important part about it is always help a turtle cross in the direction it's going. Never ever relocate a turtle. It doesn't matter how inconvenient the location might be. Turtles get very confused when you relocate them, and they will no longer know their way around and can easily get lost. My name is Chantel. I'm an authorized wildlife custodian, and as such I run Hobbit Stay Wildlife Refuge. Our mission is to make it so that we're out of business. So our mission really is so that we don't have to deal with wildlife in distress anymore. The Barrie's Lake one was actually an interesting one. I continuously was getting turtles hit on the road from the same area. And one day I was doing a trip releasing a bunch of turtles, and I thought, I'm gonna have to figure out what's going on in this area. Why do I keep getting turtles from, you know, the same stretch of road that are hit by car? And I literally stumbled across Barrie's Lake and had a conversation with Sue and her mom, and kind of learned of what was going on, and had an opportunity to have a look at this amazing wetland and its plight, and I was completely surprised and still till this day cannot understand why the laws that we have in place to protect such incredibly rare and sensitive wild areas don't seem to apply to Barrie's Lake, which is kind of my big question and always will be my big question. Because from a legal perspective, the stuff that is happening to it should not be happening, but somehow it is. We as humans always seem to think that we have the right and privilege to recreate in natural habitats. Barrie's Lake is completely not suited to it. In the end, I actually don't know that we can save it. And I hope, if nothing else, it can be used as an example to not make the same mistake again.
First and foremost, if we are going to protect wetlands in Ontario, and we have rules in place around protecting provincially significant wetlands, then we need to ensure that our wetlands are evaluated before any development is allowed to proceed. That's not the case here. There's a requirement to protect provincially significant wetlands, but developments can proceed without that evaluation taking place. There are at least 2 development proposals that I know of in Ontario currently that are in discussion and may go forward that would impact provincially significant wetlands, and yet for some reason they haven't been stopped. The door has not been shut. The door needs to be shut. If that wetland is identified as provincially significant, then no development should be allowed to proceed that's going to harm it.
Wetlands are one of the most biodiverse portions of our landscape. In fact, if you go to a wetland, you really notice this yourself. It tends to be a place that you're going to find all kinds of bird species, reptiles, amphibians, insects. Wetlands for most wildlife are a really important part of their life cycle, either for food or for breeding. And in the absence of them, then you lose biodiversity in the landscape, which means if you're a farmer that you don't have insects to pollinate your crops. If you're looking to have birds to eat the insects that you don't want in your crops, they're not going to be around. So if you reduce biodiversity in the landscape, you reduce the overall ability of the ecosystem to function.
We need to invest in restoration. We need to invest in buffering existing wetlands so that they're not degraded. And so that remains the big question: is the government willing to invest? A lot of the wetlands that we do have are on private land, so they're on farmland and other land that is privately owned. And I think an important thing for the government to do is to open up the conversation with farmers and other landowners about wetland loss in Ontario. We have a problem. Can we work together to solve that problem?
I'm William Harris Barber. I studied cumulative effects on aquatic ecosystems in the Great Lakes. And what I found from the fisheries perspective downstream at the lakes is that the problems are too big and too complicated by then. What we really need to do is look upstream at individual developments and individual impacts on individual wetlands. A lot of the Ontario Wetland Evaluation Score that makes this a provincially significant wetland is dependent on what you identify as being here. When I was looking at the environmental work that was done for the Cambridge West development, one thing that was very apparent reading through it is they didn't really take a good look at Barrie's Lake. It's hard to do that when you don't have access to the property, and also this wetland is not really the same all around it. Towards the eastern end, which is what you can see from Cambridge, the environmental impacts from agriculture are already more pronounced, so it looks more like marsh down there. And so what that does is when they did the environmental work, they looked at it and they called it a big marshy lake. But a big marshy lake is not a fen, and this is a fen. The difference being that a fen is nutrient sensitive and a marshy lake is not. This wetland is already severely impacted from nutrients. The fen is only really at the interior around those tamarack trees. So what you're going to see going forward, if they continue to put nutrients into this wetland, is that's going to get smaller and smaller and eventually die. And that fen community is thousands of years old, but if we kill it, then it's gone and you can't rebuild it.
If there's any hero in this, it's my mother, because she was here advocating for the turtles and the reduction in the speed limit and opposing plans to put a highway bypass through the wetlands before I became involved. So I'm really just assisting her in this matter. It's an unpaid full-time job. Between the research and reading the materials and all the various threats that are going on around the lake, it's definitely full-time. But we are really trying to protect this for the wildlife. We think that the more Barrie's Lake is left alone, the better chance its survival will be. It's been here for thousands and thousands of years. We hope that it will be here in the future. Like they say, every 100 years, all new people on the planet. We're hoping that the people that come after us will do a better job than we have.
What we'd like to see is the desire to have the stopping of wetland loss, and let's move forward the addition of wetlands to the landscape to a reasonable amount of time, like in the next couple of years, once we develop the policies and have the money in place to actually do this.
If it's going to succeed, government needs to be prepared to step in and play that role in terms of oversight and monitoring of compliance and enforcement. And that requires investment. So the question becomes, is the government of Ontario prepared to invest in ensuring that this can actually work?
Clearly government could spend money from other tax revenue, but that's always very challenging. You're always competing with like healthcare and doing all kinds of other things that government has to do. So we're looking for new revenue streams that would take money from charging a tax on or a return program on something that we don't want, which is pollution, and spending on something we do, which is wetland restoration.
We need citizens not only to recognize and be grateful for what nature provides, but to be willing to stand up on nature's behalf. And when the going gets tough and development threatens to destroy something, to be willing to say no. All across the province, people are standing up and saying, no, these places matter to us and we don't want development to proceed. Enough is enough.